because this is just a moment in time. Like the dinosaurs were a moment in time, or the rings in Saturn are a moment in time. The Earth, the sun, us, it will all burn itself out from the moment of the Big Bang. Like this is a closed circuit system. And from the moment of the Big Bang, that energy is, as Einstein said, you can't create or destroy energy. You can only transform it from one state to another. So that was all the energy that is in that system, just transforming from state to state. But as it does, of course, we experience that entropy of aging, that corrosion that we understand as time in the universe. So think about, you go and buy a courgette or a cucumber in the shop and you put it in your fridge. And when you buy it, it's fresh. And so all of the molecules of that structure are in a high order so that there's firmness, that there's, it has a capacity at that stage to do work with that order, so that if you were to use it to ingest it into your body, you could then transform that energy into another state in your body, etc. But with an increase of entropy, if you were to leave that courgette at the bottom of your fridge or forget to eat it, it will decompose. So that high order of molecules will begin to dissipate. And so you'll see the cell walls break apart and the water leach out. And it now doesn't have the high capacity to do energetic work as it did. And that's kind of like it is with everything. It's a cell, of a plant that has other cells as part of an organism in a cell in a greater system. So it's all just scales of fractals of cells in a much wider system that is, and this is probably not a word, entropying itself into a state of neutrality. Because at the moment, the universe always seeks to come into balance. And through that movement of energy, it will eventually get to a stage where it is just neutral. There won't really be anything left. It's like a battery, that like a battery works on the very principle that it is not in that state of equilibrium and that it is constantly seeking to do so. And in that movement of energy, while it seeks to be in equilibrium, we're taking that capacity to do work, plug it into a light bulb or whatever, and the energy will flow through the light bulb and do that work for us, just while this system is trying to get into balance. And so this is just like the universe, that it's a universe of duality, and it has poles, just like the earth has poles and a magnetic field, as a magnet itself, as we do, as batteries do. All of these systems, like the sun has poles, and that kind of polarity is part of the generation of, the nuclear energy that powers the sun, or is the power that we get from the sun. And so there's a chemical reaction being caused here in this polarity, and that chemical reaction is kind of sending energy. The negative pole is without the charge and seeking to get the charge, and so there's this constant flow of energy. But eventually that will just end. It'll reach equilibrium, and when it's in that state of equilibrium, it no longer has that capacity for work. And it's like us, we're a moment in time of this chemical reaction, this process. And where I see us going with this is, effectively this earth that we're on, it was drip charged over 4.5 billion years with energy. And so at the point when, around the life began, so the cell divided and we got more complex biology on earth, we were needing the release of the charge of the energy that was stored on the planet at that time. And so we had stored all of the carbon fuels, over millennia, the coal, gas, and oil that we need to sustain life as we know it. and began to use it up. When we were hunter-gatherers, we weren't really making that amount of impact on the earth because we were consuming, raw food, and there was no industry and agriculture, and that changed everything. So that at an exponential rate, we suddenly began to use up the energy in the battery in order to sustain life and evolve it. It's part of the process. But I see us as using that energy at an exponential rate now. We know that. And what happens with the energy is that you can recharge a battery, and you can kind of reverse the process. But again, something is lost in the mix. It never quite goes back to fresh like the courgette. It's never quite the same. And eventually, even that process is not going to be successful. And so, we're not going to recharge the planet to that extent as it and go back to the way that it was. We're going to use it up. But it's even the use of the energy, can't be created or destroyed, only change from one form to the other. So really it's always there, but it's like when you are boiling water and it turns into steam, like there's this dissipation of the energy into like those carbon fuels, as we know, when we burn them for fuel, and the heat goes up into the atmosphere. And so that high order of energy is compacted in the fuels, gets kind of dispersed in that entropy, in the increase of entropy. And then we can't harness it for energy to do work anymore. And in actual fact, rather than causing the being creative, it's destructive. And that's kind of the system that we're in. And so we are a moment in time of this battery using itself up. And what's really interesting is that I see that, source, consciousness, the universe knows this. But we ourselves, as the energy of consciousness, are evolving beyond the matter of the earth that functions through using energy in that way. And all of it is light. From the moment of that big bang, all energy, it's all light. All matter is light. It's all just energy. It just, depending on the rate of the speed of it, determines how it's presenting, solid, liquid, or gas. But this physical material world that we inhabit and perceive ourselves in is going to use itself up. And so I talk a lot on this channel about an evolution of consciousness. And it is an evolution of consciousness, not of matter, because we're transcending it. And we're at a very, very interesting juncture with that. Because part of that evolution of consciousness is, when we were at second density, we were like animals, and they, that need to protect themselves, to survive, to provide. And so where we still have our fight or flight or freeze response, from the limbic and reptilian brain, we have, if you will, three brains that evolved on top of one another. And we're at a stage where we're still, and I think there's a lot of suffering from the responses and reactions of those less evolved states. And where we're evolving to is integrating that ego that is trying to keep us safe in this material realm, to one where we can understand that everything is light, and that light is pure consciousness, and that pure consciousness, it is all life, it is creation, it is abundance, and it's love. It's all of those things that we're never separated from. It is us. We are made of it. It can't be anything else. And so it's to integrate the ego so that we no longer have those fear responses that have us blow ourselves up and perpetrate genocidal atrocities on each other, that sort of thing. So that's where we're at. We can see ourselves, hopefully, very clearly in what's playing out globally, that we don't need to do that anymore. We now have evolved to a place where we can observe and witness ourselves and understand that we no longer have to be a victim to that evolutionary function of the ego. It doesn't serve us anymore. And what no longer serves us, we can evolve past. And that's what's happening. And that's what we're learning and evolving through, is the pain and suffering that we're causing ourselves when we're knowing that the truth is that actually we are the pure force of life itself. And we don't have to do that to ourselves. It's completely unnecessary. And so the ego has to be integrated. Now I'm going to skip to tell you where I'm going with this, to something called the double slit experiment. And I think it began in the 1800s, if I'm correct. And I apologize if my facts are a little bit off. So trying to keep it on a very basic level, this experiment was a light source, and then there's a screen, and in the screen there's two slits. And so the screen with two slits, and behind that screen again, just a screen that can catch the photons that go through this two slits and see if on the other side they make a pattern of those two slits. Sorry. To see on the other side if the photons have made a pattern of those two slits. And what happened was very interesting, and I don't think very expected. The light didn't make a pattern of the two slits on the other side. What they saw instead was on the screen was a whole band of gradients of slits, like this whole band of different lines. And so effectively what was happening was that the light wasn't performing like particles, it was performing like a wave. Einstein then proved that light is both a particle and a wave. And so they continued to repeat this process as their technology and their understanding evolved into maybe the 1900s or whenever, when they created a camera or a device that could capture, that it could observe the photons as they went through the slits onto the screen behind. And something even more remarkable happened at that stage, which is when the photons knew that they were being observed, they returned to behaving like a particle. So when this device was observing the photons going through the slits, they remained as particles and showed up as slits on the other side. And when this observation was removed and it knew that it wasn't being observed by it, it returned to being a wave. Now, science, and like we haven't gotten to a point where we can fully understand or fully prove what that means scientifically. But I want to apply it to a few different things that are interesting in terms of how I see our consciousness evolving. And when we, okay, so first of all, going back to second density and going back to the ego that we created. And so the ego was created when we got to a point where we kind of became self-aware, that our consciousness was kind of turned back on ourselves so we could objectify ourselves. And that self-awareness is like a self-observation. And so in the double slit experiment, when the particle was or the light source, and let's call it consciousness then in this regard of light, when it was being observed, it turned into particle. And there's something in that I'm not into, because again, I can't prove anything, but there's something about the witnessing and observing of ourselves that holds us in particle matter, I believe. And it's part of holding us in density, because it affects how we behave in the world. It affects how we perform to the world. And I think that's one of the things that we have to evolve, that if we were to integrate the ego so that we no longer observe ourselves in the way that we are at the moment, well, then we can transcend it back into wave consciousness of light. And what's really interesting about that, I think, is the way we live at the moment so much on social media. Okay, let's just take that as one of the primary examples of consciousness in our society. And it's well known now that consciousness, or we live in an attention economy. So, the real people who are controlling everything in the world know that that is the biggest currency that they can get, is your attention and your consciousness and your observation. So when you're looking at something, you're turning it into something that is a commodity. And we're watching this on social media play out. So effectively, when we go back to the evolution of our consciousness and the reptilian brain, like three of the principal or primal needs of humans are food, sex, and rest, you know? And when we look at what we're doing on social media, it's obviously known that those really trigger those primal responses in us, that we react to all of those things. Sex, for sure. It's all over the place. It's being totally distorted and exploited. And I think like that, to keep our consciousness controlled in matter and in the ego, so that we're not transcending it into an evolved state. It's being used against us, our own primal desires, because it's those that we ultimately have to transcend. Um, Food, of course, and this thing of rest, it's this thing of us going to social media as a false form of rest or relaxation. It's just an impulse now that we pick up our phone and we're just mindlessly scrolling, getting these dopamine hits. And it's not real peace, the real peace that is possible for us to tap into and access, because it is actually inherently part of us. We're being denied that by outsourcing it to these external sources. It's a very, again, low vibrational and lower level evolutionary process that is being tapped into and harnessed to control us. Um, and so, yeah, it's not peace, it's a pacifier. And we're giving up all of our energy to this. And what's happening is, of course, is that the more we're observing ourselves in those kind of lower vibrational or lower evolutionary states, the more we're keeping ourselves in dense matter of particle. And the really interesting thing about the double slit experiment that they was part of their discovery is that it didn't matter what was doing the observation, whether it was human or whether it was machine or AI. And AI is observing us, and through that observation, it's determining how we perform and behave. And we're jumping through hoops through the double slits and performing as it wants us to. Because there is a very other interesting part of the double slit experiment that kind of relates to time and the future, and actually the future determining how the photon behaves. And then we get into very, very interesting fields of consciousness. What's really interesting as well, and I'm not making any assumptions or accusations, and I'm sure that everyone is very well intentioned, but it is very interesting that one of the biggest players in social media is Elon Musk, who is also investing and making massive and very impressive strides at getting humans off Earth to colonize on Mars. And what really interests me about that is, that's predicated on, the assumption that, again, the Earth, I suppose, in a way, it'll run itself out like a battery, that we're not going to be able to sustain life on Earth. Something else, a natural disaster or something could happen even before that would. And so this colonization on Mars, as far as I'm concerned, is predicated on the belief that we, again, are still going to be retaining physical form in matter, and that we're going to need, to have another material world to migrate to. And I actually think that, again, the evolution of consciousness that is available to us has us transcend matter altogether, so it's not necessary. But keeping us in that dense form on social media keeps us controlled. It keeps us in this lower density, lower level evolutionary matter, that, again, we become like, you know ants or rats, or we're just going around doing work that's feeding we become the battery for somebody else's system, effectively. That we're just continually having that chemical reaction in the brain to stimulus that is feeding somebody else's, it's powering somebody else. They're hooking into that, into our consciousness, and farming it in a way, you know? And so just as a theory, and I'm just putting that out there as one theory, it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. You know, it's interesting as well. And again, I'm not accusing anything of anybody because it's just good business sense. But Elon Musk has a couple of siblings, and one of them is a restaurateur. The other one has a business called Passion Flicks, which is, if I understand it, is kind of like romance novels turned into maybe programming, passion flicks for women, sort of thing. And then of course this social media of this rest or pacifying us back into, you know, more primal states and primal responses in our brain, activating those chemical responses of neurotransmitters that are having us get into a feeling state that is keeping us in a feedback loop, you know, because as well we think we're free, but a lot of what social media does is tap into those ego fears of the animalistic second density of scarcity and lack. You know, I'm in lack of I'm in lack of, you know, whatever that is, whatever you think it is, whether it's looking sexy, having a sexy partner, whatever, you know, having a lifestyle, having this, that, and the other. And it's tapping into our primal, the first primal belief of that animalistic nature, that we are in lack of something, and that we need to get that thing from an external source or an external outcome for us to feel whole. Where the truth is, again, that we are inherently whole. We are that creation, life, abundance, love, peace, freedom. That's actually what we are. But we are that battery. So from the actual source of the universe to us, we're also a system of battery. But what's happening is that circuit is being broken, and our energy is being diverted into somebody else's system. And the device to do that and divert the energy is to keep us in our primal ego state of lack and fear, etc. And also anger is another thing, you know, that keeps us attached to things. You see an awful lot of keyboard warriors and that sort of thing on social media. It's this kind of provocation of that primal anger within us that is keeping people trapped in their ego. And again, I think the consciousness is being somehow harvested or keeping us stuck in lower density in that feedback loop. And so when it comes to transcending in consciousness, again, it's I'm going back to this light thing, and again, transcending or not even transcending, but integrating the ego so that there'll be an evolution of it, because. And I'm going to give you two examples which really, really interest me about light, observation, particle, and waves. And I'm going to go to Jesus on this one. And it's just interesting, again, as throwing theory out there in terms of the evolution of consciousness. Let's look at Christ's resurrection. Okay, so he was apparently in the tomb for 3 days. And it was during those 3 days that his whole physical form of matter transcended into light. There was no observation. So is that a part of it, where he's in this sealed tomb and that allowed him to turn back into light wave in his light body? And we talk a lot about, you know, Christ being able to transcend dimensions and realms of reality in his light body. Of course, he came back then in physical form, sat down and ate fish with the apostles. You know, he was able to then go through dimensions because, you know, again, he was back to that consciousness, that vibration of pure light. And the second thing is, when he was walking on water, I find that really interesting because the water is a wave, and it was like he was one with the waves. He wasn't particles, so he wasn't that density that was like falling through the water. Could that be part of it? And you know, the apostles in the boat are observing him, but even when they're observing him, you know, is he both particle and wave? Because Peter tried to get out of the boat and walk on water to Jesus, and was successful as long as he held that connection to what he truly is. But as soon as the ego kicked in, fear kicked in, and he fell. Oh, ye of little faith. He lost his faith. And he turned back to, if you will, through that disconnection, back into heavy particle density. And, the transfiguration of Christ. So shortly before his crucifixion, and he brought some apostles up onto the mountain and transfigured so that his face shone like the sun. And his clothes were bleach white like no man could bleach. And as far as I'm concerned, he's showing the apostles, like, this is what you are. It's not a matter of just, we're humans and we'll get there when we die. We might see that might be God's face. That might be what God looks like or whatever. And if we're lucky enough, we'll get there when we die. That's not it. Christ is going, this is you. This is where we're all going with this. I'm just kind of leading the way to show you that this is where you're going. Because Christ said as well in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, whatever has been composed will decompose. And not, it doesn't just mean, our physical body, we die, it'll decompose, and then we'll go back to God. All of it, whatever has been composed, it will decompose. It's not going to be in physical matter forever. Like, this is where we're going with this. And also because Jesus took me above the earth and I could see the world was on fire. It was total devastation. Now, in the mix of that was, war, earthquake, volcanic eruption. I even think, even though it sounds contradictory, that there was kind of flooding or something as well. But the place was on fire. It was, and I knew that was kind of, it wasn't coming back from this. And I turned to him, he's always on my left at the same equal level. And he was so full of joy. When I turned to him, the contrast of being in horror to being just, he was exuding this love. And he said to me, we will rebuild this world of light. Of light. This world will be of light. Like him, when he resurrected to his light body, then he experienced reality, dimensions, and consciousness as light, and in totally different way to the physical matter that sometimes our perception doesn't see beyond. But that's where this trajectory of evolution is going. And we are rebuilding it of light. If we can transcend the density of fear, effectively, is what all of that egoic process comes down to. And, the other choice that we have is love. And when we do that, we create heaven on earth, because it's only going to happen through us. It can't happen any other way other than the alchemization and transmutation of the density within us. Again, like this, the bigger system goes down to each cell in your body is like one of these, and it can either be a corrupt cell or it can be, a radiant cell. And it's the choice of love that is the transmutation in every part of us that is turning us literally back to the high vibration of light. It's changing our DNA. It's changing us on a neurobiological and a cellular level. This is happening. And I think that, we do have free will in this process. We do have choice. So you're either going to choose the fear, and then you see the density of war, etc., all of that kind of jazz, or you choose love. And it's that love that creates the experience of heaven and earth. And I kind of am thinking that when Christ showed me earth on fire, and you look at that, it's not too far of a stretch then to kind of think of the concept, which I've never really liked or resonated with, of hell. I never really believed in that. But in a way, you can see how those who don't choose to transcend in love may stay in a realm where they're in a world that's burning. it's not that far of a stretch to get there. Um, and so that's really one of the downloads that I've been receiving at the moment. So yeah, we're a moment in time that is evolving. It can't be any other way. It's only going one direction, and we do really, I think, get to choose how we experience that evolution, whether we transcend back into the love that we are, or if we choose to remain in the lower density of fear.